Good afternoon. I need to get my right windows open, trying to juggle too many things on Zoom, but good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thanks to the magic of Zoom and our global world that we find ourselves in. My name is Reverend Tom Reed, and I am the Administrative Director of the Journal of Interreligious Studies and the Associate Director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership of Hebrew College, which is one of the 3 co-publishers of the Journal of Interreligious Studies, alongside our partners at Boston University School of Theology and Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. It is my privilege and honor to welcome you all here today to this very special event where we are coming together as a community to celebrate not just one, but 2 important milestones. The first is the publication of the Georgetown Companion to Interreligious Studies, which is now available for purchase. I'm delighted to share. Lucinda is holding up a copy of that. And I'm multitasking, so I'm going to try and put this in the chat. We have a discount code being provided to us generously by the Georgetown University Press. The link is in the chat if you would like to purchase this wonderful new volume. Supply chain issues could slow down, but could not stop the publication of this wonderful volume, and we are honored to celebrate this important publication today. And the second milestone has to do with our dear friend and colleague in this work, Dr. Lucinda Mosher, who celebrated a milestone birthday earlier this year. So we are here to celebrate these 2 wonderful things in our interreligious community. So others will, of course, be speaking about Lucinda and her work, but I'm going to take a moment just to say that I have the immense pleasure of getting to work with Lucinda, or Dr. Mosher, since she joined the editorial team of the journal. And I can say wholeheartedly that she is simply a force of nature. Her abilities, talents, skills, and interests are astoundingly vast, And as we could see in the opening video alone, she doesn't just dabble in these many fields, she excels. She has been a transformative influence on the journal, always willing to lend a hand and ready to provide insightful comments or new ideas to any project we work on together. And beyond being a treasure of skills and wisdom, she is also one of the kindest, most generous people I have had the pleasure of working with. And she brings a fantastic sense of humor to all of our meetings and all of our work. Thank you. Thank you, Lucinda, for all that you do and for the tremendous gift it is to get to work with you. If you haven't had a chance to check out the fine work that Lucinda as senior editor and Axel Tkach, our editor-in-chief, do week in and week out to produce each and every issue of the journal, please take a moment after today's event to look at one of our 35 issues and counting, all of which are available for free on our website. And that has been a commitment from the beginning of the journal, and one we continue to live into. I've put the link to the journal website in our chat, in the chat, in case you want to take a look at it now or later. I'm also delighted to share with you that the journal is now indexed with the American Theological Library Association's religion database, which we are also thrilled about. It's a wonderful step forward for the journal, celebrating our 10+ years of history and wonderful, rich literature. Be sure to follow us on our Facebook and Twitter accounts and sign up for our newsletter that is sent out 8 to 10 times a year. That's a relatively new addition to our communication streams. I'm again going to put the social media links in the chat. And you can also listen to our growing library of episodes of our Intersections podcasts, which we publish in partnership with Seton Hall's Institute for Communication and Religion. Again, I'm going to put some more links in. Sorry for the overload of hyperlinks, but this is the world we live in. There is the link to the podcast section on our website. And without further ado, I would like to invite the president of Hartford International University for Religion and Peace, Reverend Dr. Joel Lohr, to the Zoom stage to pay tribute to our honoree, Dr. Lucinda Mosher. Dr. Lohr, please join us.
Thank you so much. This is an ode to Lucinda, but I feel like I need to start with a note of immense admiration for you, Tom. I don't know how you just did what you just did. Not only did you engage me and all of us in incredibly immense and wonderful ways, but you managed to put links into chats and do a number of things while doing so. You're a very talented person. On that note, let me thank our colleagues, especially at Hebrew College, Boston University, all of you at JIRS. It is such a pleasure to work with you. The way you inspire me and the ways that you care for each other and the way that you celebrate our faculty member, Lucinda, and putting this event together, I stand in awe of you, and I mean that in the fullest sense of the word awe. You guys are awesome. Thank you for that. So, Lucinda, let me begin by saying on behalf of HIU, we use the acronym HIU here for Hartford International University. On behalf of HIU staff and faculty, our students, thank you for this opportunity to be here and to honor you, Lucinda. I was thinking about how can I do even half of a good job at this, and it's really hard to know where to start. I mean, the slideshow is just a taste of who Lucinda is. You get some images there. Those who work with her know she is multi-talented, has so many things you can talk about. And I have my own list of things. I will share some of them later, but she's such an immense and amazing colleague. And in preparing my words, I thought, I know how I feel about Lucinda. I guess I'm thinking others feel the same way about her, but I thought it might be interesting for me to reach out to some of her peers, her colleagues at the JIRS, colleagues here at HIU, and to ask them what they think of when they think of Lucinda. So I asked them secretively through a little mission. I said, could you tell me in one word, what one word comes to mind when you think of Lucinda? And then I said, number two, and how might you describe Lucinda as a cherished colleague in 1 or 2 sentences? I can't read them all, but I'm going to read a few of them here. The responses more than affirm my own feelings for you, Lucinda, but I'm going to read some for you. So I'll first read the one word and then there's a sentence or two afterwards. So the first is thorough. Lucinda brings a mind that is encyclopedic in nature. Her mental file box is full of information that is useful, true, and wide-ranging. When we use the words interdisciplinary or interfaith or multi-faith, the first person that comes to mind for me is always Lucinda. Next person, sharp. Lucinda is kind, truly, deeply so, and it's a big deal. The combination of sharp and kind is precious, and she combines this with wisdom. So thank you for those comments. Another person said, gift. Lucinda has been a huge gift to HIU all these years and continues to steward her gifts and graces in hugely valuable ways for our community. Another colleague said, competent. Lucinda is full-on go-getter who strives to make the HIU experience the best that it can be for our students and community. She exemplifies the commitment to live into our goal to be a university for religion and peace in her life, her scholarship, and her teaching. Dedicated. Lucinda's tremendous contribution to scholarship, dedication to teaching, and a spirit of collegiality always inspires me to follow her examples. Another person who couldn't decide on one word said, curious and welcoming. If there was a way to combine those two words, that would be the perfect word for her, curious and welcoming. Lucinda is committed wholeheartedly to whatever she does with enormous enthusiasm and grace. She is passionately involved in life, in art, in worship, and in her many circles of conversation. Some people, many people, are relativists in the sense that they don't take any particular truth claims seriously, but Lucinda genuinely lives into the divine, and she can and must be encountered, that must be encountered in many forms if it is to be sought earnestly. One person said, okay, I have to give you 4 words: responsible, diligent, responsive, and thorough. Lucinda is one of the most responsible and committed people I know. These are not just words, Lucinda. These are people who are saying you are one of the most responsible and committed people I know. When she says yes, she means it and she does her homework. She is faithful in her religious practice and she assumes that others are as well. She is curious and asks questions, which allows others to say who they are. She is thorough in her scholarship. She is multifaceted and adventurous. I got to go quickly here. Lucinda is a flexible dreamer who thinks in concrete steps. She's a visionary who gets stuff done. Compassionate. Lucinda is someone who leads by example when dealing with religion and the arts. It's an expression of belief that resonates across traditions, and she integrates that understanding so effectively that it's almost invisible. I'm going to give you these, by the way, Lucinda. 2 more. Intelligent. Lucinda's intelligence and diligence are matched only by her thoughtfulness and graciousness. She is supportive and a trusted colleague. Kind. I am so thankful to Lucinda for her dedication to and passion for the sacred work of relationship building across lines of difference. I'm also deeply grateful for her generous ability to share of her own life experience in an effort to help me and other younger colleagues grow into the people we hope and wish to be. Actually, 1 more. Collaborative in 2 words. This is a big word, actually. I had to learn how to pronounce this, but I know what it means. I read it all the time.
Indefatigable.
Indefatigable, there you go. Thank you. There you go. Indefatigable. Collaborative and indefatigable. You are that. I'll simply say this, Lucinda. If I had to pick my own words, so many came to mind: persistent, intelligent, caring, kind. And yet, then I went to the word friend, which is a really powerful word, actually. I think whole books and talks can be written about the word friend, but I have to say, ultimately, I decided on another word, which is related to it, and that's the word sister. You use the pronouns she, her, and hers. You are a sister to me. And I'm reminded of Psalm 133 that says how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters live together in unity. You are a sister to me. I am honored that I get to know you. I would say this as well. Yesterday, I was with probably one of the leading scholars I know in New Testament studies. And that person said something about, well, I think I've always had a chip on my shoulder my whole life, and it's made me have to prove something. But I've recently decided that I don't want to get rid of that chip on my shoulder because it pushes me to work hard and to get a lot of things done. And I've just learned to live with it, and I'm happy with it now. And I think, Lucinda, you have something of a chip. I don't think it's fair to say you have a chip on your shoulder, but you are always so persistent, and you're always proving so much to everyone. And I hope you never lose that. You're an amazing person, and I'm glad I can be part of this today. And I'm glad it's not just me that thinks you are the best person around. So we love you, Lucinda. Congratulations on this amazing day.
Thank you, President Lohr. And let's move into the next segment of our afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are, where I'll get to hear from contributors to this wonderful volume that Lucinda has edited. And I will turn the Zoom floor / mic / spotlight over to Vineet Chander from Princeton University, who will be moderating our speakers.
Thanks so much, Tom, and what a pleasure and honor it is to be here. I am so honored, delighted, and to be honest, a little humbled to play a role in celebrating my dear friend and mentor, Lucinda Mosher. As many of you may know, Lucinda and I co-edited a volume just a couple of years ago on Hindu chaplaincy entitled Hindu Approaches to Spiritual Care. And I can honestly say Lucinda has been a godsend in my life and my work, and just a great role model in every respect. And before we get to the panel, let me just say she's so darn good at what she does, right? She's a great scholar and writer in her own right, but in many ways, I feel safe to say I think her special gift of gifts may be that she is just an editor extraordinaire. And as many of us have kind of experienced perhaps firsthand, that's a task that's way easier said than done. But Lucinda just does it so masterfully and so graciously. I'll also add that she is so prolific. While most of us use the kind of crowded bookshelves behind us, mainly as Zoom backgrounds these days, in Lucinda's case, those shelves behind her, and maybe you can actually zoom in, but those shelves behind her, I believe, are actually almost entirely filled by books that she's actually edited. And you know, I don't even mean that as hyperbole. I think it's astounding the number of volumes on that shelf that she's actually edited or co-edited herself. So just really amazing accomplishment, and just love you so much, Lucinda, and I'm so happy for you and so happy to take part in this. Now on to the volume at hand and on to our illustrious panel. Let me start off by saying in her own aptly titled chapter that opens the volume, which I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, is What is Interreligious Studies? I think the emphasis is on the is there. So what is interreligious studies? Lucinda Mosher answers her own thought-provoking question by evoking ideas of betweenness and manyness. Since this afternoon, we are honoring Lucinda and her work generally, and this volume in particular, I thought it would be most fitting to ask 4 of the contributors of the volume to share a bit about their chapters. These chapter authors each wrestle so deeply and so personally with the question that Lucinda poses right at the beginning of the volume. And perhaps most strikingly, they sometimes echo her response and sometimes resist or even problematize it, but they're always engaging with it. And I think that's the highest compliment that we can pay to an editor of a volume like this one, that their contributors earnestly engage with the questions that they pose. So in this spirit, let me now turn to 4 of our panelists who are able to be with us today. And I'd like to, just for simplicity's sake, go in the order in which the chapters appear in the volume. So beginning with or. I love that you offer us a way of thinking about interreligious studies that draws from Jewish mysticism, not only because I resonate with the principles that you identify, but also because I'm excited by what you seem to be modeling, that is drawing from the richest parts of one's own particular theology to address the universal. Can you tell us a little bit about Elohim, Ayin, and Simsum, and I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, and how these three concepts can inform interreligious studies?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vineet and Lucinda. Mazel tov. Mwah. It's an honor to be a colleague of yours and to be a part of this panel. Given the limited time that we each have to share about our chapters, I'm going to focus on just one word, but that one word is a complicated one, and I hope will give folks a taste of what I'm trying to do in my chapter. So I'm going to share my screen because I think that will make it easier to follow the course of my thought and keep me on track as well. So Vineet, you asked about this term Elohim. And for me, it is the beginning of an important theological conversation related to the work of interreligious engagement that I do every day. In this case, it's mediated in my understanding by a series of classical texts, most significantly Sefer HaZohar, the book of the Zohar, the book of splendor, the masterwork of medieval Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. And in the introduction to that amazing book, there is a conversation about this biblical term Elohim. What does the term Elohim mean? Is it singular? Is it plural? What has it meant in the past to interpreters, and what might it mean in this moment for the spiritual seeker? And so the Zohar authors invite us into a creative exegetical exercise. And they say, while you might read this term repeatedly as a student of the Bible, so often, in fact, that you might gloss over it because it is in some sense the most generic name for God in the Tanakh, look again, look more closely. And the visual is important to these authors. Tachaze in Aramaic, come and look. If you deconstruct that term, that enticing, confusing term for God or gods, you can actually read it as two Hebrew words, me and ele. Me meaning who, and ele meaning this or these, depending on the context. So what are the Zohar authors trying to say to us in this deconstructive and reconstructive exercise? To my heart and mind, it is a teaching about the necessity to hold the tension between theological discovery and epistemological humility. On the one hand, what can any of us say about God, about ultimate reality, other than me? Who, what, where, when? What can I possibly know or say? In that sense, the Zohar authors are tipping their hat to Maimonides and other negative theologians of the medieval period. The less we say, the better. On the other hand, they also insist that a life without the possibility of theological discovery and creative naming would be impoverished. And so they say, me must be accompanied by ele. Who on the one hand, and this or these on the other hand. And that, to my heart and mind, is a powerful statement about my own engagement in interreligious life and work. On the one hand, discovering and affirming, holding fast to what I believe theologically, ethically, and otherwise, and at the same time, always remembering that what I know is limited. In demonstrating the power of this linguistic play, the authors of the Zohar offer us an example, a negative example of what happens when we forget to hold in balance these two elements. And so they take us to the book of Exodus, chapter 32, verse 4. It is the infamous incident of the golden calf. He, Aaron, took the gold from the Israelites' hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into an image of a calf. Then they said, Eile Elohecha Yisrael. Eile Elohecha Yisrael. This is your God, Israel, who brought you out from the land of Egypt. What a powerful demonstration, a proof text of what happens when we engage idolatrously in the past or the present in believing that we can take hold of God and shape the ultimate in our hands and in our image. And so the quest must continue. And part of my exercise in this chapter is also trying to understand, as a student of Kabbalah and Hasidism, which remain for me sacred sources, how to apply these in the present in my work, and to also understand a genealogy of sorts of who has come before me and how have they worked on these great issues and held these tensions. And so I just want to invoke one other presence in this discussion, and that is the great theologian and activist Abraham Joshua Heschel, who, as some of you know, was scion of these mystical traditions. 9 generations of Hasidic masters preceded him. And here Heschel, both the universalist and the particularist, speaks to a dear friend of his in the midst of the civil rights struggle. This is a letter to Martin Luther King Jr. And you can understand in a moment why I paired it with the verse from Isaiah. Here is Heschel in a letter to MLK. For many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips and marching is not kneeling, and yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying. The last piece of that statement is often quoted by rabbis and ministers, probably too much so in isolation. But I think reading the fuller quote is important, and here's how I want to tie it back and conclude my own remarks. Heschel went to Montgomery to march only after the conclusion of Shabbat. That was one of the conditions for his arrival at the march, because the importance of the Sabbath and of his specific, thickly textured Jewish commitments meant a great deal to him. And at the same time, he understood his involvement in the civil rights movement as being a sacred act. In fact, he said marching with King and other leaders of the civil rights movement reminded him of marching through the streets of Warsaw with his Hasidic forebears. And so both were what he sought to hold together. As he said, I didn't go to Selma to give anyone a handout. I went there because I genuinely felt like there was divine vibrancy, and there was an opportunity to be engaged in what his Hasidic forebears would describe as avodah begashmiut, embodied spiritual practice, so that his legs were praying. He was himself, in the fullness of his Eastern European refugee Jewish practicing theologian, Sabbath observing person, and he was participating in something that was greater, seeking out divine nitzotzot, sparks, wherever they might be found. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the riches from my own tradition, and for being able to articulate part of what inspires me as a Jewish person involved in interreligious work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Or. So much resonant there. And I'm especially struck by the emphasis on what you so beautifully call epistemological humility. I think that's a great thread to follow, since it also brings us to our next contributor, Wako. Wako, in your chapter, you draw from your experience teaching contemplative caregiving to argue that interreligious studies necessitates not just religious literacy, but also certain attitudes or dispositions. And you specify reflexivity, empathy, and there's that thread again, humility. Why do you think this is, and how do we go about cultivating these dispositions? And what do you see as the challenges to making this shift of disposition happen?
Thank you very much. My Buddhist name is Wako, which rhymes with taco. Just there you go. Before I speak about your question, I want to also express my love and gratitude for Lucinda, who I met when I participated first in her interfaith leadership workshop. And afterwards, she asked me to give her some feedback on the course, which ended up being a 2-hour conversation, at the end of which she invited me to co-teach with her the following year, which was a wonderful experience. And what impressed me so much about Lucinda, and why collaborative is the first word that comes to mind, is, she just has this amazing talent for bringing diverse groups together and sharing the credit and sharing the space, as this very event is a perfect example of, and as others have observed and commented, and as we have seen in the slides, you are tireless and unbelievably productive, and it is a joy and a pleasure to count you not only as a colleague but as a beloved friend. So here's to you, Lucinda. In response to your question, it's actually kind of the other way around. It's not that my experience teaching contemplative caregiving informed my understanding of interfaith studies, but my understanding of interfaith studies informed my approach to teaching contemplative caregiving. So I was trained in traditional religious studies, right, in which we learn about various religious traditions, kind of within the confines of a classroom, at arm's length and from the neck up. And the approach of interfaith studies is much more about learning how, not just to have kind of basic literacy about the particular beliefs and practices and so forth of different religious traditions, but to develop the ability to actually engage constructively and productively with people who are religiously different from ourselves. And the attitudes of reflexivity, or the dispositions of reflexivity, empathy, and humility are central to that work. My chapter is about a course that I co-wrote, the chapter about a course that I co-taught with Hannah Murphy Buck. And our approach to the course, which was called Caregiving at the End of Life, it was a course for nursing and non-nursing students at the Catholic University where we were both teaching at the time. And Hannah is a theologically trained critical care and palliative nurse and nurse educator. She grew up in the Open Door community in Atlanta, which her parents helped to found. It was an intentional community based on the Catholic worker model. And she's ordained as a deacon in the Presbyterian Church. And I was a full-time professor of religious studies. Now I'm a full-time hospice chaplain. So I have experience both as an academic and as a chaplain, and I am ordained as a priest of Soto Zen Buddhism. And we felt that when we were trying to figure out how to teach caregiving at the end of life, the most basic fundamental thing that we can bring to a caregiving encounter is non-anxious presence. And in order to develop non-anxious presence, contemplative practices are essential, I think, in that. So what I mean by that is that caregivers, whether they are professionals or lay people caring for family members or friends, have to be able to temporarily bracket their own needs in order to attend fully to the person in front of them. But they also have to remain aware of their own needs so that they can meet them outside the caregiving situation. Contemplative practices help people do this by helping people to be present with their own, mental or emotional or physical discomfort without feeling like they have to rush to fix it or escape it or whatever, get away from it. And it is that ability to be present with one's own discomfort in a compassionate, non-anxious way that translates directly into one's ability to be present with somebody else's discomfort in a non-anxious way. And that in and of itself is an act of healing. So that is why we felt like it was critical to ground our course in contemplative practices. So I'll say a little bit more about the dispositions of empathy, reflexivity, and humility before I kind of tell you about the course and what we learned from it. So reflexivity, of course, is the ability to be aware of your own social location and how it affects and shapes the attitudes, assumptions, and biases that we bring to any field of study. And in order to be able to engage with someone who is different from oneself, you have to know where you're coming from and where you stand in order to be able to engage with another person. When we do that, when we engage empathetically, when we learn how to put ourselves in the position of somebody else who's different from us, the limits of what we know become very clear. And that's where humility comes in. So humility is remembering and accepting that our own knowledge and perspectives are limited, and that even well-intentioned mistakes that we make can have kind of unintended consequences. William Cronin famously described intellectual and cultural humility as not something any of us ever achieve. It's a way of living in the face of our own ignorance, a way of groping toward wisdom in full recognition of our own folly, a way of educating others or educating ourselves without any illusion that our educations will ever be complete. And these dispositions help to foster societies that are characterized by respect for people's religious or other identities, positive relationships between people of different religious backgrounds, and common action for the common good. This is another important distinction between traditional religious studies and interfaith studies or interreligious studies, which is that religious studies takes kind of a neutral stance, a non-normative stance to various religious truth claims. Interfaith studies is explicitly grounded in the normative value of promoting pluralism and promoting pluralism as a positive value. So let me tell you a little bit about the course itself. I'm going to read you the description of the course. It says, everybody dies. This course explores a variety of theories and methods for caregiving at the end of life and is designed for both nursing and non-nursing students. We will explore the medicalization of death, structural inequalities in access to medical care, palliative and hospice care for people facing terminal illness, and clinical dimensions of death and dying. We will focus on contemplative practices that enable caregivers to care for themselves and provide effective support for patients and their loved ones. We will introduce various religious and spiritual perspectives on dying, death, and the afterlife, and learn about rituals for grief and mourning. So we had students every week do particular contemplative practices, most of which derive from the book Being with Dying from Joan Halifax. And they kept journals kind of talking about their experience of these practices and what they were learning from them, while we were also having them engage in the intellectual content of the class. And many of our students reported that these contemplative practices helped them kind of gain some insight about issues in their own lives and begin to deal with them differently. That helped them navigate their various life challenges and so forth. One student wrote, "These meditations have made me more aware of how much I neglect my problems, both physically and emotionally. I much prefer to send my thoughts and will out toward helping others, even in a general sense, than to dwell on myself. I hope by acknowledging this in myself, I can work to be more self-aware and take better care of myself inside and out." So here she's developing reflexivity she certainly demonstrates empathy for others, but she's beginning to have a little more compassion for herself through these kinds of practices. So the class was grounded in contemplative practices. We also taught practical skills like how to turn a bedbound person, how to change the sheets with a person still in bed, that kind of thing. We took them to a nursing lab and did all of that. And then the final project that they did was called a death fest. And in that, they did research into various areas that they were interested in, various topics that they were concerned about, and they organized an event that was for the entire campus community to share what they had learned in the classroom. So this is, again, a difference between interfaith studies and traditional religious studies, which can stay confined to a classroom. In an interreligious studies approach, we wanted them to take what they'd learned from the classroom out into the community at large. And so they had, we had events like they organized a death cafe where people could come and talk about various experiences that they'd had with death and dying in a kind of an unstructured way. They had performances of art and music that they produced. They had informative kind of instructional displays about various aspects of death and dying. And it was quite a successful event on the campus. We also had them talk to their own loved ones about their own wishes at the end of life, and to begin the process of kind of writing an advance directive and declaring a proxy. And the most explicitly interfaith activity that they did was a careful conversation, which is an exercise designed by my colleague Sid Brown at Sewanee University, which is a contemplative interreligious dialogue with someone who is very different from oneself. And that experience was a marvelous one, where they reported really encountering these people who were other to them and recognizing their common humanity and deepening their relationships. And that was really at the heart of what we wanted to do. Just to conclude, I'll share a comment from one of our students who went on to become a nurse during the midst of the COVID pandemic. And she wrote, I'm flipping there. "Because I see 40 people a day and everyone is freaking out about COVID-19, it's really helpful to be able to come home and practice yoga and use positive self-talk exercises to de-stress. The exercises of meditation and self-reflection from the course taught me skills that help me be compassionate toward other people. One activity, which is a Buddhist practice for cultivating loving kindness, asked us to imagine someone that you don't like, and then imagine kind things you would say to them or about them. Now, if I have a patient who's really hard or who is being hard on me, it helps me to imagine being nice to them, and then it helps me actually to do that. It makes it easier for the patient and for myself. It helps me to have the energy to do it again the next day. And now I work full-time in healthcare, and am daily reminded of the necessity of that kind of practice for one's own well-being in order for us to be able to attend to the well-being of others. So I think I've finished my time and maybe then some, so I will stop. But thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Wako, so much. I wish we had more time, particularly as someone in the field of chaplaincy myself, and also someone who draws from contemplative traditions. I was especially really felt resonant with your chapter, and I highly recommend it to everyone once they get their hands on the book. Wako's 3 contemplative dispositions offers us one framework to interreligious studies. Rita Sharma, in your chapter, you introduce us to another, namely what you coin the critical, interreligious, interdisciplinary theological reflection framework, or CIITR. You position this as a way of moving us from comparison to genuine reflection. Can you tell us a little bit more about CIITR and how you think that it can be useful to redress decades upon decades of power balance asymmetry, of inherited trauma, and of ongoing colonization? How might we understand it as an intervention in the space of interreligious studies?
Thank you, Vineet, and thank you for organizing the panel. And also, I just want to take a moment to say that I met Lucinda when she invited me to contribute to a volume that you, Vineet, were editing with her, which I then went on to create a space for at the AAR for its review, and it then received an award. And our relationship continued. And then she asked me to contribute to this volume. And this took a span about 4 years. And in this short span of time, I came to see Lucinda as something of a superhuman, and that I know very few people, and of course my life is limited by the academy, who can do and who accomplish so much and accomplish it in a spirit of joy and warmth and embracing of others. So much congratulations and much love to you, Lucinda. So to answer your question, Vineet, in the interest of time, I've written out my response so that I don't go over. And if I do, give me a yell out. Now, my chapter has a very long name, and I shorten it to CIITR. It stands for, I cannot get rid of any of these words because they all matter. So the methodology that I'm introducing here, that I've spoken of somewhat elsewhere, but that I expand into a framework, is called critical, interreligious, interdisciplinary theological reflection. So now, it is a framework for moving us, as Vineet says, from comparison to action. And what I want to say here is that interreligious theology or comparative theology has been pretty much in our, in our radar for a long time. And scholars that have contributed to it, like Francis Clooney, Paul Mitter, Jeffrey Long, and many others, have done a brilliant job of bringing people into conversation at the highest levels of principles. But there's I want to take the conversation even further. And so what I say is that the word critical in CIITR, critical is twofold. So it requires the practitioner to take an analytical stance toward their own, basically their own tradition, as well as to the relationship that has been brought into conversation. And so this relates directly to Vineet's question, in the sense that, in relation to this latter issue of who are we bringing into conversation together, is it a relationship based on mutual illumination and a balance of power? Or is it a association that is fraught with a history of dynamic asymmetry of power, overlaid with the traumas of empire and colonialism and intolerance? These histories must be considered in light of religious studies' own roots in the triumphalist colonial era's strategic study of the religion of the other. And the denials of the scars of empire upon indigenous people in particular, but on colonized religious cultures as well, this denial is not an option. Neither is the disavowing or the disowning of the history and presence of power imbalances, of asymmetries of power. So deep understanding cannot emerge without a framework that provides guideposts for those who undertake this journey into unknown terrain. And these critical considerations provide these vital guideposts. Now, it's important to note that traditionally, it's so much easier to turn away from that and say, well, you and I are friends, you and I are close colleagues, so what does it matter? Let's just forget about the past. But it doesn't work that way, because you will not bring your faith community or the entire world of the academy or the question of justice with you on this dialogue if we're in denial. So it is important to note that traditionally, interreligious theology or comparative theology is the work of bringing two philosophical, theological traditions together for examination of their convergences and divergences. Now, such bringing together is also the work of straight interreligious studies, which is what the book is about. However, interreligious studies is broader than critical interreligious interdisciplinary theological reflection, which I speak about in my chapter, because interreligious studies necessarily goes beyond theological engagement and towards interchange on a plethora of themes. You know that from the sides of the book. But comparative theology, which is a major, important, and distinctive facet of interreligious studies, in this chapter, I'm suggesting a new direction for this comparative theology or interreligious theology, one that is interdisciplinary and transgresses the boundaries of its conventional text-based or neck-up, as Wako said, mode. Therefore, the space it occupies within interreligious studies is quite large. So I argue for ritual, aesthetic, emotive, and other embodied aspects of religious life, not as completely distinct from, but rather as embedded expressions of theological, religious, philosophical life. This can be achieved through critical engagement with the sacred texts and religious thought, but through embodied, contemplative, and performative encounters, which may include meditation, sacred sound, music, ritual, dance, pilgrimage, art, iconology, and the use of visual and material culture, or participation in other facets, praxis. In the case of religions that are especially oriented towards experiencing sacred texts and their theologies and principles, through embodied practice, deep understanding is possible less through conversation purely on text and more through immersion in practices that embody the text. So now this effort to foreground is not a simple matter. This effort to foreground this comparative interreligious theology is all the more challenging as it emerges in the face of the primacy given to the methodologies that are often constrained by the required application of the hermeneutics of suspicion to all religious phenomena. That's what we're trained to do in religious studies. The study of religion trains us to do that. The hermeneutics of suspicion is foregrounded. Now, we need to be critical of our own traditions, critical in the sense of analytical. Are we living up to our highest principles? That's a different matter from beginning with suspicion without even deeply understanding what you're looking at. So scholars, including practitioners, are often called to deconstruct vigorously before they're called upon to understand deeply. But there are limits to the primacy of critique alone. And these dominant suspicious approaches cannot use the hermeneutics of religious philosophy, of constructive theology, of contextual theology and contextual theoethics, or critical scriptural exegesis, critical theological anthropology, socially conscious theopraxis, liberative theoethics, or integrative research methodology, all of which are necessary beyond suspicion for the work of the critical reclamation, reconstruction, and recontextualization and application of religions to the project of inspiring action for a viable global future for all of us. So I want to end by just noting that I've been inspired by the scholars who are Caribbean studies and Latin American studies scholars who are the pioneers of decoloniality theory. And decoloniality theory is not out to blame anybody. Decoloniality theory is out to reclaim hidden, vanishing, submerged epistemologies. In contrast to conventional post-colonialism, decoloniality seeks to locate, theorize, and apply indigenous epistemologies, contextual epistemologies, and support long submerged ways of being and becoming and understanding and experiencing, and bring them into conversation with the reality of a globally interconnected civilization. Decoloniality studies is important for this kind of project because it seeks relationships with other submerged voices, transculturally, globally, but also aspires to be part of and inform current dominant international discourses with the expertise and sustaining ethics and experience of Indigenous voices. So this framework, critiques conventional discourses of development, but illuminates asymmetries of agency and power. But most importantly, it ends with the retrieval and integration of Indigenous cosmovisions into of what Arturo Escobar calls a pluriverse that sees ways of life that are conducive to a sustainable planetary future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. As we bring our panel to a close, I'd like to now turn to our last panelist, Timur. Timur, I'm really struck by the way in which your chapter, maybe most of all, complicates the narrative or narratives of interreligious studies, in many ways returning us to where we started, Lucinda's question right in that first chapter. As I read your chapter, I was struck by your interrogation of the questions themselves. And I would love for you to speak to what you see as the role of what you call the contrapuntal engagement in defining or perhaps redefining for us what interreligious studies could mean for us today.
Thank you, Vinit. When do you want me to stop?
Timur, let's say if you could maybe take us to about a little bit before 2:10.
Excellent.
Would that be okay?
Excellent, perfect. Because in that case, I'm just going to read a quote from Orr's chapter, which just says it all. But let me just say before I say anything that has to do with what I wrote, or maybe that has to do with it. Lucinda, thank you. When you called me and said, hey, why don't you write this? I don't know if you remember it. My instinct was to kind of warn you that it may not be a good idea, that I have too many questions. I tend to hear a word and then kind of think about it a little too much. Like Vinit, you use the word interrogation, and I'm like, no, I'm not interrogating anybody. I just don't want to interrogate people. And when I hear words like lines of difference, I'm like, no lines, please, nobody draws the line. So it's a kind of, so I think I told Lucinda that the piece will be prickly, and then and then I kind of thought about it, and I think contrapuntal is a better word, and discipline is a better word, and all of that. But let me just say this. I don't know if I told Lucinda that at the time, but I think in part, I think it was early fall when Lucinda called me. And Lucinda, for you to like invite me after what I told you, to invite me to actually write, that there is a word missing in all of those wonderful words about you, and that word is brave. It was very brave of you to do that. So thank you. But let me just say this. For a few years now, in New England, we would have some weeks, it might be, late summer, August, July, sometimes into September, where we would smell the smoke in the air. And that smoke would be blowing from the West Coast. For a few years, it has been like this. So when Lucinda called me, it was like this, it was eerie, it's the world is on fire. Then we have the pandemic, and then we have wars, and the scars are being ripped right now off. Rita uses the phrase, the scars of the empire. Right now, right? And so I was in that mood. I think I might be still in that mood of thinking that perhaps same old is not the way to go if it keeps resulting in the world on fire. And that's why I wrote that, it is not my intention at all to be engaged in discussions of whether interreligious studies is a field, a subfield, or whatever the institutional setup it is. To me, it sounds like a setup. I'm kind of very concerned, kind of weary about the not the narratives, but the reflexes, the grammar that goes into kind of how we express what we are trying to do with the best of intentions. And I kind of, in part, I wrote it to kind of to emphasize what is actually precious there. Through all of those entrapments, through all of that, what is actually precious there? And I think we heard some of those notes today when Wako talked about dispositions. You know, not a field, not the lines, but dispositions. When we talked about, and there's so many amazing contributions in the volume that really meditate on what an academic might call epistemological humility, right? And kind of turning the fragility into strength, right? It's like it's in there, and it's wonderful. And so in part, I wrote that piece inspired by that. That to me is the promise. The promise to me is the discipline, not as a field clearly outlined and separated from others. To me, the promise is in the discipline as an ongoing practice, you know. And so the whole piece that I ended up writing it, I was inspired by those are the penultimate, almost closing words in Edward Said's autobiography that he wrote just before passing away. And just as he recalls encountering his mother who had passed away, but encountering her, being with her, continuing to be with her. And, you know, in what sense? What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of temporality, order, progression? What are the lines of difference in there? And Edward Said in that moment, let me just say this. Some of the stuff I wrote there, I had to crack a joke because it was getting a little too heavy. So as I was thinking about Edward Said, in there, to me, that's where his definition of contrapuntal is at its best. And it's precisely because I think that's when he is free to not have to speak within academic enclosures. It's not from within this field. He's speaking, and the first words in there are, I occasionally experience myself. So it's about experience. It's about the discipline as experience, as opposed to some kind of, and so of course, contrapuntal has to do with hearing. Contrapuntal has to do with sound. What I would like to do to bring this to a close is I opened this volume. It arrived, Lucinda, thank you. And when I opened the table of contents, this is a contrapuntal composition. You know, there are so many notes, and they are, you know, out of place, going in all sorts of directions. What is going on here? And all of a sudden, there is some kind of harmony that emerges from all of that. And you, as an editor, you were able to kind of bring it all together and just let it be, right? And to me, that is an example of your contrapuntal discipline as an editor. And I would like to thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Timur. You, as they say, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just, and out of my heart and out of my mind, I was just thinking that as well. And so in closing, I'd like to, first and foremost, I'd like to thank our 4 chapter contributors for this panel. And I want to encourage everyone to procure this groundbreaking volume. it really is a phenomenal, phenomenal work. I also would like to close with this observation, which in many ways kind of echoes what we just heard from Timur. Lucinda, you may recall this, when you and I were working on the Hindu chaplaincy anthology, at a certain point, and I remember this as being kind of early in the process, relatively early, at a certain point, we both kind of spontaneously remarked how exciting it was just to read through the proposed table of contents. So kind of to Timur's point as well. Just reading those names and what they brought to the table was so exciting, was so thrilling in a sense. And we shared that feeling that even if somehow or other this book were never to see the light of day, it would be sad, of course, but we could actually take solace in the fact that it was just a joy to have gathered together the authors that we had. And this, I think, brings us back to, Lucinda, to your gifts as an editor. You're not just an editor of words. You are, as I think the Timur just invoked for us, you are a conductor, a musical conductor. You are a curator of thinkers, bringing together some of the best people on the planet. And I don't mean to exaggerate. I mean that literally, some of the best people on the planet in their respective fields and spheres to engage in an extremely and extraordinarily rich exchange of ideas. I think and I hope that this panel has given us a glimpse into that richness and into what you, Lucinda, have accomplished with this volume. And so with that, I just want to say again, thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Vineet, and thank you to our speakers. And as we have been talking about embodied experience, contrapuntal nature of this work, we now get to hear from three different folks from Lucinda's universe who are going to share some blessings for Lucinda. First, we have, this is out of order, but was originally listed on the website, but we have Catherine Lohr and Reverend Margaret Rose, who I will spotlight as we speak. If it's not letting me for some reason. Oh, they got it.
Greetings, Nancy. This is, can you hear okay?
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're in an echoey hall. Forgive us. My name is Catherine, and this is Margaret and Lucinda. We are so honored to join this special celebration, not only of this remarkable achievement of the companion, but of your significant ministry over the years that has influenced and impacted not only the life of the academy and the seminaries, but also the ecumenical movement and the churches wrestling with issues of interreligious engagement and how we can do that as an important dimension of our ministries. Margaret has many times shared with me that if it weren't for your significant work, the Episcopal Church would not have its interreligious statement. And certainly your work over the years has influenced the ELCA's interreligious engagement as well. So we join in rejoicing, and Margaret will be offering the blessing.
Lucinda Mosher, faithful guide, servant of God, we give thanks for you, for all of you. Bless your head and the open mind that weaves facts and ideas into knowledge and wisdom. Bless your ears that have listened across the world's faiths and heard their and our voices. Bless your eyes, always delighted to see the image of God in another. Bless your shoulders, carrying burdens and sharing those of others. Bless your heart, open, receiving, and offering love and grace. Bless your hands that write and type and embrace and make joyful music. Bless your feet and the journey they have taken and the miles still to travel. Lucinda Mosher, faithful guide, servant of God, friend, scholar, wisdom holder, bless you, body, mind, and spirit. And receive this blessing as we have so been richly blessed by you. May it be so.
Amen. And our next blessing will be from Bilal Ansari, and I will spotlight right now. There we are.
I am sick to my stomach, and I hope you too are sick to your stomach. I'm sick to my stomach by what's happening on the hills down in Washington, D.C. I'm sick to my stomach what's happening with the strange fruit that lays dead in the streets. I'm sick to my stomach by the construction of houses and mansions while people lie homeless and cold. The Prophet Muhammad said that there is a cure for every disease within honey. In the Quran, in Surah 16, the surah about the bee, Lucinda, it reminds me of you. God says, and your Lord has inspired the bee. They set up hives in the mountains and in the trees, and in what human beings construct with their hands. Then they eat from all the fruits, and they go along the pathways of their Lord with precision. From their bellies emerge a fluid of diverse colors, containing a healing for the people. This is a sign for people who reflect. Thank you, Lucinda, from taking from the mountains on high. Thank you, Lucinda, from taking from the trees the fruit. Thank you, Lucinda, from going wherever human beings have constructed things, and you have found the pathways to deliver a healing from your belly. Thank you, and God bless you.
Amen. Thank you, Bilal. And our last but not least blessing for this afternoon comes from Preeta Banerjee, who is a friend and colleague of my own, who I'm delighted to introduce. Thank you, Preeta.
And foremost, a student of Dr. Lucinda Mosher. Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may we too, student and teacher, move together. May we relish our studies together. May we perform diligently. May we and the thing we study before us be in brilliance and not in discord due to lack of understanding. Peace, peace, peace be with us. I also would like to, as a student, take this moment to invite everyone to put in the chat your own blessing. I will compile them on a PowerPoint. I've already saved those blessings which people have left. And if you do not feel comfortable putting it in the public chat, please private message me or use my email, which I am putting in the chat. I will collect all of it. And Lucinda, I won't do the justice of your beautiful PowerPoint slides, but I've learned much under your mentorship, and I will do my best.
Thank you, Preeta. And now I'm delighted to introduce my colleague at the Journal, Axel Tkach, our editor-in-chief, who will be joined by Hussein Rashid to share a special announcement of, and I need to find Axel on the list, where, add spotlight. And Lucinda, I'll unspotlight you, give you a little break from being, and Hussein. So thank you, Axel, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm here. Hussein Rashid was here. He had to step out briefly for another call and hopes to return later if we're still going on here. I am delighted. I'm grateful to be here. I am the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Interreligious Studies. I met Lucinda, I believe, the first time several years ago. We shared a panel at the AAR. I believe it was the first time. I was just sort of entering my graduate studies at the time. We had crossed paths and email occasionally, and I was delighted to learn years ago again when the journal was looking for another editor that Lucinda Mosher, Dr. Mosher, was coming to join us. And at that point, I got to learn from her and be enriched by her knowledge, her wisdom, her experience in all forms, in all places of interfaith and interreligious work. And so I'm glad for that and for that blessing, Lucinda. So I'm here to announce that in honor of Lucinda Mosher, we are we have a special call for papers for a Festschrift. So what I'm going to do right now is share my screen just to display sort of the Festschrift information, but I will also send you a link and a file and with the Festschrift in this case. So let me just do this right now here. The Festschrift is entitled The Art of Interfaith, a Festschrift in honor of Lucinda Mosher on interreligious engagement and the arts. And it is going to be co-edited by myself, by Or Rose, and by Hussein Rashid, bringing together all of the areas of Dr. Mosher's knowledge, experience, life, and practices, given that she is both trained in theology and the arts, music, and so on. This call for papers, the special issue, will concern the theme of interreligious and interfaith engagement in the arts, including interreligious, intercultural, and comparative theology in the arts. And the arts is defined as broadly as we can make it, as you see over here. This CFP will be circulated via our website, via our social media handles, Twitter, Facebook. I urge you to go to our website, irstudies.org. On the first page of our website is the little link to put your email address in to join our MailChimp newsletter. It will be circulated that way in about in a few days, probably, in our next newsletter that goes out soon. And I really encourage all of you, please, to circulate the CFP among your colleagues, your students, and so on, as broadly as possible. We'll be looking for abstracts and titles by June 15th, with submissions by November 30th. And you can see, I won't go through all this, but I will definitely send you this information as well. So let me just quickly stop sharing here. Put this in the chat. You can download right over here. I can also just send you a version of the PDF, I believe, via the chat as well. But please stay tuned to your email, to your newsletters, and once you receive it, please circulate it as much as possible. We really look forward, or Hussein and I, in editing this volume, this special issue for the journal in honor of Lucinda Mosher. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Axel. And speaking of upcoming publications, we have another brief announcement from Rabbi Or Rose.
Hi, folks. Lest you think that Lucinda is resting on her laurels, having just published this massive Georgetown volume, she, Ellie Pierce of Harvard's Pluralism Project, and I are busy at work on a volume that is tentatively entitled With the Best of Intentions, Interreligious Missteps and Mistakes. And we're in the midst of negotiating with Orbis Press. And in some ways, it is a follow-up to the earlier volume, My Neighbor's Faith. But this time, inspired in part by our colleague, Francis Clooney, whose name was mentioned earlier, we're inviting people to think about the oopses and the ouches. Heschel, I'm channeling your spirit from years ago. The oopses and the ouches the ways in which we plan diligently and then shift happened, and how things just didn't go as we would hoped, and what new and different things emerged. So if you're interested, please be in touch with me, with Ellie, or with Lucinda. We have about 15 or 18 commitments and several chapters in hand and drafts in hand, but we're still looking at more abstracts, and I think it will be yet another contribution, a Lucinda-inspired contribution to the field.
Thank you, Or. And now the time has come and we get to hear from the honoree herself. I get to introduce the well-known Lucinda to everyone now.
Thank you so much. I think it's probably easier if I put this here. This has been truly overwhelming. At some point, you just have to let go of what you thought should happen and live in what is happening. A Facebook friend posted that in December 2018. It was a pithy reminder of what I'd come to realize a couple of years previously. The calendar had made it clear that, quite simply, any hope for attaining the key professional goals I had coveted and had strived toward for decades had now passed me by. I'm not going to list them, but one of them was a real professorship with a full-time job with benefits. You know, that tenure track is not the norm sign at the AAR was written for me, you know, and there were other goals. I could have stayed in wistfulness mode forever, or I could make peace with the reality that now I was, and perhaps always had been, an academic entrepreneur. Hence, I worked with a business coach for a year and formalized what already was. And on my 70th birthday, which was in 2017, I founded the Neighbor Faith Consultancy, an LLC licensed in the state of Florida, where I live. In late 2018, I came to yet another realization of the need to live in what is happening. A series of evaluations led to a diagnosis: Parkinson's disease. With that diagnosis came an action plan aimed at allowing me to stay fully Lucinda for a good long time. Medications, specialized exercise classes, practice of medical qigong, and, wait for it, ballroom dancing lessons. The improvement in my quality of life was almost immediate. I could sing again, and I could do the tango. In short, I embraced new ways of doing the things that make me, me. Poet-philosopher Khalil Gibran once wrote, "When you work, you are a flute through which, when you work, you are a flute through whose heart the whispering of the hours turns to music. Which of you would be silent when all else sings together in unison?" Not I. I wanted to continue my work as an academic and a multi-instrumental musician for a few more years. Back in 2002, a client had declared that Lucinda is the ideal companion for anyone who wants to walk deliberately into difference. I was determined to keep on being such a person. Determination is one thing. Opportunity is quite another. And we are here today because in 2019, 2 men gave me wonderful opportunities. A get acquainted conversation with Al Bertrand, who'd become the next director of the Georgetown University Press, took place over coffee at the AAR annual meeting in November of 2018. And that led to a Zoom conversation in February 2019. And that conversation opened the door for the development of the book we celebrate today. Al guided me through a rigorous process of proposal and review. By summer of 2019, I was ready to invite contributors, which I did one by one. And I knew I was on the right track when I got 20 responses of yes before I got my first no. This book showcases the writing of a wonderful, patient, cooperative team of authors. I am thankful for all 54 of them. Meanwhile, in the fall of 2018, I had the first of many good conversations with Joel Lohr, who recently had become president of Hartford Seminary, now HIU, about the institution's best use of my abilities. He had ideas, if I could be patient. Now, mind you, I'm over 70, patience is running out for me, but Joel asked, and I was. In the fall of 2019, Joel let me know that what we still were calling Hartford Seminary would be joining with Hebrew College and BU School of Theology in publishing the Journal of Interreligious Studies, and that I would be representing our school on that staff. What a gift. I love working with this team, such a joy. The pandemic expanded my university, Hartford Seminary, now HIU, portfolio exponentially because I live in Florida. The school's in Connecticut. I know how to do my work online. I've been teaching online since the fall of 2016 exclusively. So in 2020 and in 2021, President Lohr added several significant items to my portfolio, and that too has been an incredible gift. It means that as the Georgetown Companion comes onto the market, its editor is much more of a player in the academy than she was when she began to craft it. Indeed, I have been persistent. I have also been resilient. Persistence is good for building muscle memory. Resilience is more complex, more elegant. Resilience, to paraphrase cancer survivor Abby Bettinas, is a mindset born when progress toward your goal is slow and the barriers seem impenetrable, and yet you keep going because somewhere deep down you know the effort will be worthwhile. Julian of Norwich, that wonderful writer from the English medieval era, reminds us, and I paraphrase, that life has its disappointments and each of us has our maladies, and yet all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Indeed, there remain goals towards which I strived mightily that remain and will always remain beyond my grasp. Yet you have gathered to celebrate my scholarship anyhow, and in ways I have never anticipated. So many things are indeed well. I have gratitude in abundance for the work I have been given to do at HIU, with the journal, with the Building Bridges seminar, for which I'm the rapporteur, and at St. Mary's Episcopal Church, where I'm the music director. Gratitude in abundance for my incredible colleagues in each of those venues and beyond them. Thanksgiving for my spouse of 53 years, without whose steadfast collaboration I would accomplish very little. For our amazing kids, kids-in-law, and grandkids. At some point, you just have to let go of what you thought should happen and live in what is happening. And what is happening is quite lovely. During the spring in which I celebrate my 75th birthday and the 20th anniversary of the receipt of my doctoral degree, I also get to enjoy the release of my biggest publication project to date. I pray that it will be useful. To all of you who chose to celebrate with me today, thank you. And may all be well, and may all be well, and may all manner of thing be well.
Amen to that, Lucinda. And thank you. Thank you, Lucinda, for all that you do, as I said earlier, and all that you are. Thank you to each of our speakers who has joined us this afternoon. And thank you to each one of us one of you who has joined us today. And as one last reminder, the Georgetown Companion to Interreligious Studies is available for purchase. I'm putting the link in the chat one last time with the discount code. Please take advantage of that. And thank you again to Georgetown University Press for making that available. We are proud that several of the contributors of this outstanding volume are active members of our journal staff and our journal board of advisors. Please don't forget to check out the wonderful content that continues to be published regularly on the journal website as well. Again, there's your link. And as we close this wonderful afternoon that had not enough time to really go so deep in all of these wonderful areas with these wonderful thinkers and thoughts. What better way could we close, could we end this afternoon together than leave this virtual space than with music? We will bid you all adieu, accompanied by the sounds once more of the multi-talented Dr. Lucinda Mosher herself, and I think Barry makes some guest appearances in this too. May we all, each one of us, be blessed by this wonderful gift of music today that transcends words and has the power to speak directly to our hearts in ways we continue to endeavor to understand. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon. Enjoy the music.
Voici venir du printemps, l'amoureux et belle saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureux et belle saison. Le courant des eaux cherchera le canal qui s'éclaircit, et la mer âme de ses flots harmonie la triste couronne. Le canal s'égare, se plongeant, et ses larmes pointent dans l'eau, et la grue qui fauche s'en va, retraverse l'air et s'en va. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison. Le soleil éclaire et s'en une plus sereine clarté. Du nuage à l'ombre s'enfuit, des chevaux écoutent et assis, et forêts des champs écoutent. De la mer humaine verdue, et la brise découvre ce terre. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison. Devenue le fils du guide, l'univers Mother Citre, this of Nagavore Java, Animoki Volantane, Animoki Ramadasha, Animoki Najatori, Sikene Memane Sopa, Amoruse Fonde Plesi. Voici venir du printemps, l'amoureux et belle saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureux et belle saison. Triomphons et nous et cherchons les efforts précieux du printemps. Toutes choses sourient et plaisir, célébrons la gaie saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison. Me voici venir du printemps, l'amoureuse et belle saison.
Wow,